Hi. So what do you think of my shirt? Nice and bright, eh? I thank Jason Kennedy for getting these shirts for all of the instructors with the BC Youth Bowling School in 2019. Sadly, the last time we were able to have a bowling school for youth, but we're going to be back stronger than ever in 2022. I think it'll be a fabulous opportunity. But why am I talking about the shirt? Because today's session is part 2 of Imagery. Wearing this shirt brings back memories, wonderful memories of what we called the Pylon Group because of the color, right? A dedicated crew of individuals that were really committed and have been committed for decades, not just years, but decades, to helping the youth bowlers of British Columbia. The same criteria that goes into the BC school goes into the Saskatchewan school as well. This shirt brings back memories, imagery, emotional imagery, visual imagery, every kind of imagery. And since today's part 2 session is about arrival, it seemed fitting that I don this particular shirt that is of particular interest to me. So let's get started with the arrival session of Imagery with a quick review of part 1, which was the pre-arrival. Pre-arrival was about your mindset and developing a mindset that basically had 3 criteria to it. 1, coming to the center and to the event with a gladness for the opportunity to be able to be participating in that event, a level of excitedness and eagerness to being there. 2, a sense of purposefulness, knowing why you're there. And 3, optimism, optimistic about your opportunity to be there. So that in a nutshell was a review of our pre-arrival. Now we're into the arrival section. The arrival section of Imagery is meant to be 100% applicable, easy to use within the competitive setting. I would suggest you take time during your practice sessions to also use what will be laid out here. Keep in mind that everything that I share with you today and in other podcasts represent a brief capsule of what you can find in Success Driven Logic of the book or its companion workbook. Sales pitch over. Let's get started. The arrival. The arrival I want you to start imaging is with something I call game preparation phases. There are 4 parts to it. The first part is you having a big picture feel of what it's like to throw your very best ball. Now that really encapsulates all average groups and all ages. We've all thrown a ball that we felt was really solid. It felt good. So the big picture phase, first phase, is about capturing that feel, allowing yourself to dwell on the feeling from an execution perspective and from an emotional perspective of focus and excitedness or calmness, all right? Getting the all-encompassing feel of what it's like, all right? Now, as the bowler in front of you gets up on the lane, you now move into narrowing your focus. And as that bowler in front of you gets up on the lane, I'd like you to narrow your focus to 1 or 2 things you want to remember to do. Essentially, it revolves around some real basics. Hold my follow through, hit my spot, take it easy, lift, rotate. Oftentimes, those are the basic elements of what you would focus on. Now, that may differ for you, and that's okay. The key here is when you move from the big picture element, which is everything prior to the bowler in front of you getting up on the lane, you are going to narrow your focus to 1 or 2 specific things you want to execute with. And you're executing them in your mind's eye as part of the whole process, not individually, not separately, but part of the whole process. So if it's speed, You are imagining yourself taking your time throughout your whole approach, taking a slower, smaller first step, possibly, and feeling that just flow through your whole approach and delivery. All right? After that, you come to the pre-shot routine. Pre-shot routine begins when that bowler before you gets off the lane and you are now walking up to pick up your ball. We've talked about the pre-shot routine many times in the past, but I will just briefly describe it. The pre-shot routine begins from the moment you start walking up on the lane to the time you take your first step. The pre-shot routine provides a stabilizing element to your preparation, and it also provides you the opportunity to narrow your focus to one specific skill set. That one specific skill set could just simply be go. It could be hold your follow through. Basic stuff. So here goes. Walk up on the lane, you pick up your ball, stand at the end of the approach, breathe, take a nice deep breath, slow, relaxed breath. Think of one thing you want to remember to do. Your eyes are always forward. You're not looking to the left or the right. And when it is your turn, you have the right of way to proceed. You move into your stance. And as you move into your stance, you settle yourself into your approach and delivery. And when ready, you go. That's it. The key element here is really what you do to set up your first step. And that is picking up the ball, stepping to the end of the approach, taking a deep breath to relax, thinking of one thing you want to remember to do, giving yourself one solo thing to do. One thing, not two things, not three. One thing. Then moving into your stance. Oftentimes, that first phase of the pre-shot routine when you're standing at the end of the lane lasts about 5 seconds. Could be a little more, could be a little less. You move into your stance, you settle in, and when you're ready, you go. All right? Pre-shot routine. After the pre-shot routine, you've executed your shot. The fourth phase is an assessment period. Now, if you've thrown a really nice ball, got a strike, etc., that assessment is about praise. Not praise that, hey, I got a strike, but praise about the quality of your execution that went with it. All right? If the quality of the execution was a bit suspect, then you have approximately, as research proves, you have approximately 4 to 5 seconds, somewhere in that range, to be able to collect a clear image of what that execution felt like. If you wait longer, other things can creep in your mind to distract you, and the clarity of that picture can be lost. So the idea is, after you've thrown that ball, to give yourself a period of assessment. Now, let's say you've thrown one ball and left a corner pin on your first ball. All right? That may have been a good shot. Do you think about how well that went? Okay? This isn't about praise, about saying, yes, good job. This is about the analytical part of you saying, I held my follow through. Good shot. Okay? Good shot. I held my follow through. So link your praise with a skill set that you have control over. All right? So if it was not successful, then you assess what you need to do for your ball 2. All right? Now, you have a small window of time, right? And you can bring that in as you sit back just prior to entering your pre-shot routine to play round 2, ball 2, or ball 3, whatever. The idea of the pre-shot routine is applicable to every single ball. Excuse me. As you've read my book, you will have remembered probably that part of one of the chapters talked about how much time we take on the lane. The pre-shot routine, typically based on research using golf and basketball, the pre-shot routine takes about 10 to 15 seconds. Any more than that, extraneous thoughts start coming in and you get distracted more easily. So the idea, 10 to 15 seconds. For 5-pin, that means from the moment you stand on the end of the deck with ball in hand, end of the approach, to the time you take your first step, 10 to 15 seconds. Repeat that process for each shot that you throw. Research within 5-pin that I've done shows that we tend to give more attention to our first shot and less attention to our second and third, based on a time analysis. I would guess that I also linked that to the productivity of scoring. And what I recognize is that when we took away from what we usually put into our pre-shot routine, there's a deficit in scoring. We don't score as effectively on our second shot or our third shot if we diminish how much time we give ourselves to preparation without overdoing it, right? 10 to 15 seconds. Okay, I think I've said it all, right? So, game preparation phase has 4 parts. First part, big picture, what it feels like to throw your best ball. You're doing that off the lane, in between frames, in between your turn, all right? Second part, narrowing the focus. When the bowler in front of you is coming off the lanes, what you do as you approach your turn of play. The pre-shot routine, and the fourth part, assess. All right, now I'd like to move to the nuts and bolts of this particular package. There's 2 parts I want to talk about. One is role play, and the second part is recovery. Now, role play is extraordinarily valuable. Now, here's how it works. It's bottom line, role play works when you narrow the gap between your intent of practice and your intent of competition. You want what you do in practice to meet what you do in competition so that they're together, one. All right? The idea is narrow your gap. I've always believed in that. Narrow the gap between how you practice and how you play in tournament play. So, here goes. We are now going to study role play cards. First up, if you're a relative veteran to the crew, you've been around, played tournaments, etc., make a list of cards of the people you know are going to be in the competition. Write their name on individual cards. I use index cards. I have, in my personal collection, I have about 100 of those. I also have cards for the unknown, so unknown bowler, all right? Now, after that, I also make a set of cards based on average scores, all right? Individual scores more than average scores. So, for example, I'll have scores that are under 200, and I'll also have a collection of scores that range 200 to 300, and a collection of scores that range 300 all the way up to 450. Keep in mind, though, that I use a bit of a formula in doing that. About 20% of the scores that I create are aimed at scores that are at least 30 to 50% above my current average. About 20%. Another 20% are aimed at about 20 to 30% of my average below average. Okay? So I've got 20% on the low side, 20% on the high side. And of the other scores, 60% of them fall between average and those outlier scores, the high achieving scores, all right? And the low side, okay? So they're smack dab in the middle kind of thing. So now you've got these individual scorecards, each score on an independent card. You also may choose to set up 3 game scores, because match play, if you're in match play often consists of 3 game totals. So make a set of 3 game totals as well. Now, we got the scores. Now let's look at the 10th frame. I actually divide the game into 3 parts. The beginning, which is frames 1, 2, and 3, and 4. The middle, which is 5, 6, 7. and the end, which is 8, 9, and 10, 11, and 12. And I will devise scores. I may even draw the symbol for strikes and spares or whatever, but ultimately I write down a score that I would expect to make in the first set of frames, 1, 2, 3, 4. What I would expect to make in the middle section of the game, and scores to make at the end of the game. I also create a set of scores for just the 10th frame. So from 45 all the way down to 2, I suppose. I've never made a score of 2, but 15 and 13 and 10. 10's about the lowest I've ever gone, I think, on my scores. But for some of us, it would be relevant to put scores of 5 in the 10th frame because your average may dictate the reality that every once in a while, a score of 5 sneaks in. All right? So now you've made a set of scores, the individual scorecards, 3 game totals. You could make a set of cards that represent 10 game totals or 8 game totals as well, if you like. Anyway, now you excuse me. Now you're also making a set of cards for the first 4 frames of the game, also for frames 5, 6, 7, and also a set of cards for 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. All right? You also make a set of cards for the 10th frame. You could also make a set of cards for 9, 10, 11, and 12 if you like. So whatever works for you, great. Do what makes the most sense for you. And use a bit of common sense. Do not overdo what those scores are going to be that you create. All right. So in other words, remember I mentioned the 20% below average, 20% above average kind of idea? Well, the same thing here. Don't give yourself an overabundance of really high, pie in the sky kind of scores. Be realistic about it. I don't recall, for example, in all of my years of competing, having, I'm sure it's happened once or twice, but I don't recall anyone throwing a 400 single against me. So that means, even though someone may start off with a 3-bagger or a 4-bagger, the chances of them hitting the 400 mark, pretty slim. So you don't need to create a whole abundance of 400 scores to beat, all right? Okay, so you've got these cards. Next, scenario cards for events. What is the event in question? Write down scenarios that can come up for you, all right? If it's YBC, if it's the zone level, if it's a provincial level, if it's the adult open or a master's event, a qualifying round or a national championship, fun bowl, whatever it is, identify the event specifically on a card, all the events that you might take part in, okay? And now create some scenarios on another set of cards where you may be up by 10 going into the 10th, or down by 20 going into the 10th, or whatever, okay? Could be down 100 with 5 frames to go. Now, you make these various scenario cards. Now, let's put it all together. Here goes. I draw a name from my list of players. And I've got James on my card, James Munkendoodle, whoever, right? James. I've got his card in my hand. I pull a scorecard, a single game scorecard. Now, I may choose to look at that score, or I may choose not to and just leave it face down. There are ultimately 2 realities there. Playing when you know the score has a different feel for the competitor than if you don't know the score. Invariably, we never know the score, but it helps to prepare for both, because every once in a while we might sneak a boo at the score sheet, even though we know that is essentially not the most productive choice. Excuse me. So I pulled a name, I pulled a score. I may choose to show it to myself, or I may choose not. Pull a scenario, 10th frame. at what particular event, all right? For example, maybe it's just a single game score I'm going to beat today, or maybe it's, instead of a single game score, maybe what it's going to be is a scenario card, a 10th frame challenge, or frames 1, 2, and 3 challenge, or challenges 5, 6, 7, okay? For those frames. Pick a scenario card to use. And then give yourself a minute to relive what that experience is going to feel like. And as you get really good at this, I know that when I'm doing it, the hair on my arms can start to stand up. I get kind of tingly and excited about it all, okay? Then you go out and play that game or that set of frames, whatever your scenario was that you chose, okay? All right, so another set of cards that I have not mentioned right now, and I will right now, are time cards. When we're in a practice setting, it's very easy to get into the quick repetition of throwing, and that is very valuable for us, all right? It helps us internalize what it feels like to throw a really good ball on a consistent basis, all right? But a time card of 30 seconds or 1 minute in between each frame that you bowl will help you visualize from a feel perspective the time required in between balls. And it'll also challenge you to keep your frame of mind. By using the time cards, you can also implement the game preparation phases that I outlined earlier on, all right? So if you're using a time card, you use that time in between frames to rehearse the big picture, all right? Got it? Okay. So that's time cards. Really nice way of making your practice realistic. I wouldn't overdo that, because one of the biggest benefits of practice is the sheer repetition, all right? However, it is important to practice time cards as well. Don't forsake them, don't write them off and not do them. They are important. I want to direct my comments now to something called recovery. Recovery is that period that we take when we recover from a poor game, or when we recover from a set of less productive frames. So not ordinarily when you get a head pin, but let's say that you've started with 3 strikes in a row and then you punch. Recovery, what's the next frame look like? Or you've had 3 open frames. What does recovery look like? How do you get into recovery? You've punched 3 head pins in a row. What does recovery look like? I think you get the gist of what I'm saying here. Recovery is about you basically recovering from a poorer experience in scoring, all right? Or execution, or in the quality of your mindset even. Okay, so recovery works like this. Again, on a role play card, identify a scenario, okay? And that scenario might be head pin. So you get up there and you throw, knowing that the last frame you're gonna head pin. Now, you take the time to make it as real as you can. Recovery can also work fabulously well when in a practice setting. What do you do when you do get in a scenario where you are punching a lot, let's say, or you've missed innumerable number of spares that you're typically accustomed to making, all right? First up, one of the key elements to recovery, slow down. Slow down your mind, slow down your body. As we get stuck in a rut, we tend to do a speed up thing. We start getting a bit anxious in our mind, We may start awfulizing, and we end up not breathing as fully as we can. And when we throw off our breathing pattern, then we also throw off how smooth we can execute the next shot. So recovery begins with you slowing yourself down. And do that with a nice, even, slow breath or two. And allow your muscles to just relax. There's a couple of simple drills you can do to help you with, if you feel particularly tensed or you feel like you're always throwing hard and can't get away from it. Tighten all the muscles in your arm as tight as you can in your throwing arm. And then just let those muscles relax and pay attention to how relaxed that muscle then is. And then go about visualizing again the feel of that relaxedness that you have developed in your arm. Repeat that process. Tighten all the muscles in your arm. Swimmers have this when they're on the blocks before they dive into the water for their race. They do a swimmer shake where they shake both hands and arms, all right? Again, a good strategy to help shake out any tightness. Breathing. Imagine a candle in your chest. As you breathe in, the candle brightens. As you breathe out, the candle dims. That's just a focus drill. But the idea is it gets you breathing in rhythm again and helps calm you down. So recovery almost always, with some exception, begins with you returning to a better focus. And that focus typically requires you slowing down. And you do that through breathing and muscle relaxation. Then your mind is clear and ready to focus on the execution of the shot ahead. All right? Now, when you apply that strategy, sometimes you find immediate success. The goal here, if you've punched a head pin, for example, you're on 3 head pins in a row and you want to fix that problem, all right? Well, the goal is to improve on that problem. So that doesn't mean getting a strike necessarily. It means making a more productive shot. So that means anything but an unsparable, right, is progress. So if you happen to leave a corner and get a chop, that's progress. If you feel the quality of your shot has improved, that's progress. All right? So hook in to the feel for recovery based on beginning by just slowing yourself down. That's recovery. Now, in a competitive environment, that recovery can be used anytime you choose to use it. It can also be used in practice, and please do so in the practice setting. Remember, your goal is to narrow the gap between how you practice and how you play. All right, that concludes part 2, the arrival and the use of imagery during competition by using role play cards, by recovery, all right, and by using game preparation phases. Part 3, I'm going to be relatively short and sweet with, but part 3 is going to examine some specific drills you can do to enhance imagery skill sets. All right, thank you very much for listening. Take care.